Good morning and welcome to AM News Network presents. Good morning and welcome to AM News Network presents The Morning Report with Rachel Baird and usually Ed Peruta, but Ed's taking a break today. Not really a break. He's got a big event later on that I'll tell you more about in a moment. But I'll be joined today by Dan Lynch, who's usually back there in master control, so he's doing two things at once today. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning. It's hard to find good help around here, isn't it?
We're always here. Well, we're not always here. We're here Monday through Thursdays from 7 to 7:30 a.m. and Saturdays for our summary judgment show from 4 to 6 p.m. And Dan helps us with all of those. Thank you very much. I don't know what we'd do without you.
And thank you, Ed, for those phone calls that he responds to for tech support 2 minutes before the show starts.
Yep, he's up. He's got some sort of event today. He's covering a balloon event at the University of Hartford. They're sending up a balloon that has something to do with the solar eclipse. The balloon's going to watch the solar eclipse. It has cameras on it. I don't know. It's complicated. But Ed will be covering it, and I hope to be there, too, after my hearing that I have at 9 o'clock in Bristol.
Neat.
So what do you bring to the round table this morning,
Well, you know, it's funny the things that kind of show up on your social media feed or, you know, whatever. But I noticed the other day, well, there's a couple things. The fact that our state still doesn't have a budget, of course, is having a rippling effect in terms of towns being able to do little things like, you know, open schools in time. Mm-hmm. And not that it's preventing them from, they could open them, but they just don't know what kind of money they have. So I've seen some schools now kind of delaying the openings of schools, laying off teachers at the last minute, which is terrible.
You know, funny you mention that. I just read in the paper this morning that a lot of teacher slots are going unfilled, and they're thinking about changing the requirements to make it, I guess, easier to get a teaching certificate so there are more teachers out there.
You know, I tried to read, you know, whatever it was, a week and a half ago, you know, when the legislature, or I should say, you know, when first the House had voted in favor of the concessions package, as they like to call it, and then the Senate was deadlocked 18-18, so Nancy Wyman, our lieutenant governor, came in, broke the tie. But it was interesting to me to go read all the kind of the various legislative leaders and all the other elected officials putting their spin on things, some of which couldn't disagree with. And I wish I could remember who it was who made this analogy so I could give them credit for it. But they said, you know, the current situation is a bit like two different crews showing up on the scene of a fire. And rather than starting to put out the fire, they're standing there arguing about, you know, how they should put out the fire or whose fault it was that the fire started to begin with. And I thought, you know, sad truth.
But to be fair, let's just use that analogy and take it to another level. The two crews show up, and one crew is sure that if it's done in the way that the other crew wants to do, then more people will die as a result. And the other side is just as sure that if the other side gets their way, more people will die as a result. So although it seems like they're fighting and they should both be in it together, they have completely separate views of how the other's actions will affect what's going on. And if you feel that way, then shouldn't you stand up and fight for what you feel is right? I mean, I'm all for compromise and stuff, but there are points where I understand why people don't give in.
Yes, but by the same token, you could dig your heels in and be fighting over the issue and then be absolutely certain that if nobody's fighting the fire, then everyone will die. And maybe it's a terrible analogy to use.
I think it was a good one.
Yeah,
I think it's a good one. It kind of drives it home what's going on. And I don't know, in the budget sense, is that what's going on? What is going on? Is it just impossible to decide what to cut or how to get more revenue? I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean it's a tough situation. But the other thing that caught my my attention was and I don't know if I could find it quickly, and I guess I always critique when folks do that, right? Sit there and read newspapers.
Folks, well, usually you critique Ed.
Okay.
Poor Ed.
But I did notice that out of the federal courts, there was a ruling that was quite interesting as it dealt with public officials who chose to, because of course, public officials, it's no secret now, are all using social media. And one public official who, I guess, got tired of the criticism of an individual chose to block someone on Facebook. And it was later found to be a restriction of that individual's First Amendment rights. And so they got to unblock them.
Are these officially sanctioned social media accounts? I would think not. I would think each elected official starts up their own account. It's not like gov.org or anything like that. So I don't know. It's interesting.
I think as soon as you make a decision to put yourself out there and create a page or whatever, now, nobody's saying you have to tweet or nobody's saying you have to use this stuff, but if you've chosen to use it and that's a platform, it's like showing up at a town hall meeting or something, and if somebody's wants to comment, you can't just ignore their comment or block them from commenting because you don't like what they're about to say.
Yeah, you can't leave the good comments on and take the bad ones off.
Yeah, so I thought that was kind of interesting. But there's a range of things.
And I comment on that too. We're still early enough in our use of cell phones where some people say, I don't want to use that smartphone. I don't need a smartphone, or whatever. Especially people that are over a certain age. Obviously people under a certain age don't talk. Lawyer. I don't know how you would do without I don't even like that term smartphone, but you know what I mean. I don't know how you would do without that. If every other person in your profession has a cell phone that makes them available by text and email and voice pretty much around the clock, how can you compete with them if you don't have that same equipment?
It's hard to even, we take it for granted now. Everybody picks it up and we call it, we tend a mobile phone, but I think that really that label in and of itself is inappropriate anymore, because if you stop, and I was having this discussion with somebody the other day, as we're driving in a car down to Philadelphia, and I held up the phone. I held up the iPhone 7. The number of devices and things that this has essentially kind of replaced, and I'll say put out of business. We started going through the list. Of course, it functions as a phone, but remember the old Rand McNally road map atlases? You wouldn't dream of going on a trip anywhere without your big Rand McNally road map atlas. But everybody's got a GPS in their pocket. Everybody's got a phone in their pocket. Everybody's got a very good quality camera and video camera in their pocket. Everybody's got an audio recorder. They've got a calendar. There's a couple of other big things. Of course, access to the internet, little computer in your pocket.
That just brought back huge memories, that big Rand McNally map.
Yep.
It would always be in the trunk, and then on if you're taking a trip, you pull it out. And nowadays, young people looking back on people like us that used to look at those big maps, it's almost like looking back at people that used to look at the sun to tell time.
Right.
It's just...
Well, it could be worse. You could be referencing a AAA triptych. Where you, if you're a AAA member, you can say, hey, well, I'm going to drive from here to, Columbia, South Carolina.
Yes.
You can go to the office, they'll map it out for you, and you'll take page by page, and they'll turn it through, and you should stop in Fredericksburg, and,
I know.
But it is amazing to stop and think that, on the one hand, you have access to all this stuff, and for me, it's indispensable to have GPS kind of all the time. I tend to use the phone feature more in some cases as kind of a note taker. I'll anything trick. If I have to go to the store, sometimes I'll take a picture of whatever it is that I want to make sure to remember to get that at the store.
Speaking of water, you were going through some pictures that Ed took the other day. And you ran across one of a receipt next to a bottle of water, and I think Ed's thumb was probably in it. I remember.
It took me a second.
And you figured it out?
Well, it took me a second because I thought, why?
Why is he holding up a bottle of water with a receipt?
And then, of course, I realized that it was a bottle of water that had that the receipt was showing the tax had been paid, and it showed the date and how much for an item in the state of Connecticut that's not supposed to be taxed. So,
Ed and I went through a period of time where we were pursuing that issue because I guess it's if it's sold in bulk, then you're not supposed to tax it. So over 16 ounces of water is considered bulk. But a lot of these stores, like Dunkin' Donuts, sell 16.9 ounces, but they charge tax on it, which you're not supposed to do. And so I was thinking about bringing a lawsuit, and I spent a lot of time looking at that issue. But the way the laws are written, it prevents a class action on any issue about taxes like that. You have to just report it to the Department of Revenue Service, and then what are they going to do about it? Well, nothing, because they do know about it. And there's been whole opinion letters written about it. So basically they've tied the statutes up where there's nothing you can do about it. You can't bring a class action, so as a lawyer, you're not going to file a lawsuit over 9 cents or go through the administrative remedy process over 9 cents, because all they're going to do is give you 9 cents, and they're not going to be forced to fix the problem. So congratulations, to whoever thought that up, where there's no relief and no remedy for them breaking the law.
Right. I've read, and maybe you could shed some more light on this. I've read this concept, capable of repetition yet evades review. And, a lot of times I kind of shake my head because, sadly, I've seen in my own experience in the last 9 or 10 years a number of things that kind of seem to happen over and over and over in state court. Mm-hmm. And in my view, they're not accidents. In my view, they are things that it's kind of just, standard business practice. It's knowing full well that orders can enter, and sure, an individual might take an appeal, but it doesn't matter, because even if you're able to kind of, wind your way through the whole process and somehow, I hate to say the term win the appeal, but somehow succeed in your argument and therefore get a decision that reverses, send you right back down, and you can go through the whole thing all over again.
Well, let me give you an example where I ran into that. I had an appellate court case where that was an issue, and it was what we have in Connecticut called the risk warrants. And if you're in imminent danger to yourself or others, they get a warrant and take your guns for a year. Well, if you're going to appeal that, obviously, maybe not so obviously to a lot of people, but an appeal takes longer than a year. So by the time the appellate court is hearing the argument, or you're filing your briefs, the year's over, the person probably has their guns back, and they may even have their permit back or not. And so in the case I had, the state argued that the issue was moot. It was moot. And so then you have to argue, well, it may be moot in this case, right, but it's capable of repetition, and it's probably going to evade review because it's only a year-long penalty, and we all know that appeals take longer than a year. And in that case, the state pulled something. They knew that if the person didn't get their permit back, then I could argue that it wasn't moot because they hadn't had their permit back. So they gave this person their permit back simply for the reason of the appellate court case, right? Yep. I think because at that time, at least in Connecticut, in the firearms unit, they just weren't giving permits back that much. Now they're reasonable and they actually look at the facts. But back then, they just said, we don't care, just wait that 2 years for the hearing. And so they gave this person's permit back, and then sure enough, they argued at the appellate court. She got her guns back. She got her permit back. It's moot. What relief can we give her? And so I dug through the paperwork, and I found one letter from the state police, and it said, we're returning your permit, but please be aware that if something like this should happen in the future, we'll take this into account or something. I said, there it is. So they are holding something against her. So there is still some effect of what they did. And that won the day. The appellate court said, yeah, we're going to examine this. We're not going to say it's moot. And then, of course, they ruled against me. But but we got past that. Right. We got past that one stage. Yeah, so whenever whatever happens to you is of a short duration, then it's more likely on appeal that they're going to be able to argue that.
I mean, I've seen, as a result of some of the things that I've experienced, there are other individuals that I've come into contact with, either proactively or reactively. Some people I've kind of reached out to because I've read about their case, or people have reached out to me, and I think about things like, and I think we've even talked about it here on this show, quite some time back. You and Ed had me on a Saturday as a guest, and we touched on, the difficult issue of ADA accommodations and access to the courts, and kind of what I'll call equal and full participation in the courts. And on a routine basis, the Connecticut Judicial Branch will deny reasonable requests for accommodations by people for whatever their reasons that they might need them. I mean, I won't kind of take the time to try to parse out why somebody might need one. But the ADA certainly not only provides for this stuff, but mandates it. And, Connecticut doesn't have a good track record in this area with the judicial branch. They entered into a settlement agreement back in 2003 with a gentleman who, I don't remember if he was deaf or hard of hearing or something, but he was requesting certain accommodations that not only did they have an obligation to provide, they had the ability to provide it, kept denying it, and in the end, that whole controversy ended up in a settlement agreement between the Department of Justice and the state of Connecticut Judicial Branch, signing a 4-page agreement. I'll say your friend Martin Lidman, a name I hear on the show often as it associates with, FOI requests and what have you. But it's just interesting to me to see time and time again, as recent as this week, where somebody had reached out to me from a different state who's forced to deal with Connecticut, doesn't really understand. They make requests for accommodations. They're denied. And what does the judicial branch say? They say, well, you could always file a grievance, or you can go to the DOJ. But they know full well that the hearing that's scheduled, say if somebody's going to have a hearing today on August 9th, and they deny the accommodation request, well, they conduct the hearing anyway. In the meantime, the grievance process is 20 or some odd days long, or going to the DOJ. And so by the time, by the time you could get any type of what I'll say administrative decision on what's going on, it doesn't matter, because you've already been discriminated against. You've been forced to participate in the hearing. It's over. And now they say, well, you can always take an appeal of that.
Yeah, no, I get
it's a cyclical thing. And
that's a perfect example.
I also think about a situation where I was contacted recently. I was interviewed. I won't get into kind of, who was doing the interviewing and all that, but I ended up having this discussion talking about the concept, and I think we might have touched on this within the last few days off camera. The whole concept of judicial retaliation, and the fact that 20 years ago or 30 years ago, if you were to say, and people were saying, that, hey, police officers are doing these things, and many people would say, oh, that's an outrage. Police officers aren't doing this stuff. And then increasingly, people were coming up with video evidence to demonstrate that indeed there are a small percentage of police officers who are kind of stepping over the line and abusing the situation.
And unfortunately, a larger percent of police officers who know about the smaller percent and do nothing about it. That's the biggest problem. And do nothing, right? And perhaps for many reasons, right. Perhaps for fear of their own retaliation amongst their own ranks against them. But so very valid point. But I guess the reason I bring the point up is, I'm 55 years old. So growing up, certainly there was this. I'm going to say, in the way we were raised was you just respect many positions of authority, whether it's doctor, lawyer, police officer, judge, you name it, priest, and so it was unheard of to think that these positions would abuse their role. But we've now seen, and I think there's no question now, that if somebody were to put forth an allegation of misconduct by a police officer, or I was abused, or this or that, no longer do people have outrage and think, oh, that's impossible, you're crazy. I think people are now generally, if anything, I think given the media now, people I think are inclined to believe it and then want to know more detail. And so that kind of myth is kind of gone. Then you look at some of the other stuff that's come out with probably, the most well-known case out of Boston, but many places in the United States where sadly the Catholic Church, where people have stepped forward over the course of decades to say, hey, there was abuse taking place by members of the clergy, against individuals, youths, whether boy, girl, whatever it was, and everybody thought, oh, that's taboo, that's terrible, that's impossible. But now we've unfortunately seen that those things are real. And so you start to look at these things. Why is it so unbelievable to think that in a small percentage of cases, 1 or 2%, that there are judges sitting on a bench somewhere in the United States or in the state of Connecticut who are biased, who are discriminating,
who are retaliating against it. Why is that so beyond the realm of possibility for folks to consider? And yet when somebody steps forward and tries to make this argument and tries to bring this stuff forward, everybody in the system, in my experience anyway, the Connecticut Judicial Branch will band together and kind of double down. And so this individual becomes, and I'm obviously talking about some of the stuff that I've experienced personally, so it's easy for me to talk about. But there are other people as well who I see their cases. I have no doubt that there's retaliation taking place based on the fact that they've spoken out either against a judge or against a system that truly is not there. Somebody who will file a judicial review complaint or an attorney complaint, sorry, but there are attorneys who need to be grieved. And it's just so unbelievable to me and very disappointing to think that.
Let me comment. Let me make this a little more controversial. I got to tell you, when you do that, when you say something negative about attorneys and then you look at me and apologize, I'm somewhat offended by it because, number one, I'm a person first. The sad thing about becoming an attorney is people see you as an attorney. I mean, I'm a person first, and just because you say something about other attorneys, that really doesn't affect me at all. Why would it affect me at all if you say something negative about another attorney? That's like if you were to say, not all women are whatever. Sorry. Well, why?
Good, fair point.
Why do people do that? I don't get that.
That's a fair point.
But a lot of people do that. Everybody does that. It's like, just if you're talking to me and you say something negative about an attorney, I'm not taking offense. How do I know? What do I know? I mean, there are actually attorneys out there who have practices that focus on suing attorneys for malpractice.
Not many, but yes.
Yeah. So, well, insurance defense firms and everything else. So why? I don't get that. I don't get that.
No, it's a fair point, and I think
it's almost insulting. It's almost like, are you accusing me of covering up for other attorneys or what? I'm in practice by myself. I'm not like,
Right.
What am I? Why do I deserve that?
Now, I should ask these questions because I just don't know. But there are these. For instance, for the attorney discipline area, there are the statewide grievance committee. They have these local panels, and I can't remember. I think there's, I shouldn't try, somewhere, 11 or 12 local panels. We have a caller. Is it Ed?
Yeah. Yeah, hold on a second, Ed. Hold on. Go ahead.
And so, have you participated? Has the judicial branch or anybody ever reached out to you as an attorney to say, hey,
no.
Would you like to participate on? Because
yeah, but this is my feeling. When you start to participate in things like that, then you become part of the system and part of the establishment. And my practice is kind of focused on rooting out problems in the establishment and the system. And I don't think you can be both. I don't think you can be part of the system and the establishment and try to root out problems in it, because then you have a conflict. Or maybe we need people in the establishment of the system rooting out problems, but...
No, we do, and that's exactly what we do.
Yeah.
And that's why I think I asked the question, is because I tend to see year in and year out, the deck just gets shuffled slightly differently, but it's the same names that keep coming up. And so the statewide grievance, committee with these local panels.
Well, the last thing the system or the establishment wants is somebody in there that doesn't fit in, because they're going to make problems. They're going to make problems. And it's funny, I was looking up somebody I knew from high school, because my high school was the focus of this show on HBO called The Keepers. So although I don't even remember anybody from high school, basically, because I left right after I graduated and didn't keep in contact with anybody, I did remember this one girl who, and I looked her up, and she became a lawyer. She's in Baltimore, hugely involved in animal rights, and she got appointed to a commission in Baltimore on dog abuse, because I guess down there they just burn dogs and they shoot dogs. People use dogs to fight. I guess it's a huge problem in Baltimore, abuse of dogs. And she ended up resigning from the commission because she said it was just a commission set up to make things look good, and it was being hamstrung in its ability to do anything.
Right.
And it's people like that that you don't want, that the establishment doesn't want, because then they're going to speak out and make trouble, and they're going to resign and leave, or the thing's going to be disbanded. So it would be great to have, and maybe this is a problem in police departments too. You know, the last thing they want is somebody in there calling everybody out, making trouble, and that person's either going to have to resign and leave, or they're going to be forced out. So what is the solution to that?
No, and you know, you see me picking up my phone as you were talking because you triggered my memory, and I took a snapshot as I was reading an article. A freshman legislator last week who had the courage to stand up on the floor and make remarks that were all factual, all truthful, about the fact that perhaps some people in the chamber had too close a relationship with people in the unions, etc., 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 was essentially stating the obvious, something that everybody knew as they were about to take a vote. And what ended up happening is they ended up getting admonished by Lieutenant Governor Nancy Wyman. Rather than applauding them for having the courage as a freshman legislator to stand up and state the facts that everybody knows, it's kind of like, we don't do that here. We don't rat on our own, you know. Well,
right.
maybe we need 156 some odd other. I forget exactly how many all told. What is it, 151 senators, I think, or I'm sorry, representatives and 36 senators. So maybe we need 180 legislators just like that, who could come in and actually put on the record exactly what's going on, as opposed to...
But it's funny because, I mean, we're almost done our show, so I'm going to point out that the way we began this show was talking about how the two sides, or the sides in the legislature, can't get along to do a budget, and it's similar to firefighters who show up at a fire and are arguing about how to fight it. But if those firefighters are all kind of at odds about ratting each other out, and I saw you leave work 5 minutes early, and that's wrong for the taxpayer. Well, I saw you did this. It's going to be really hard to have any firefighters working together on the same page. In other words, human beings all make mistakes. And if in a profession people choose to constantly point out everything that everybody else is doing wrong, then nothing is ever going to get done. Fires are not going to get put out. Courts are going to come to a standstill, because the fact of the matter is every human being does do things wrong. It's just at what level you choose to point it out. To some people, you know, parking in the wrong spot is, you know, talking on your, you know, we've all seen pictures of legislators talking on their phone, or what, you know, you don't know what level people have is wrong. So where do you stop the ratting each other out constantly? Because if all you do is spend your time ratting each other out, then the fire's not going to get out, the budget's not going to get done, people aren't going to get arrested. You know what I mean? Where does it stop?
Yeah. Ed, you called in this morning. What are your thoughts?
I just been mesmerized watching the show.
Well, it was nice hearing from you, and I didn't want to stop the momentum, so we just kept going.
No, and I like when you were pointing your finger.
Oh.
You know, you were pointing your finger, Rachel, when you were talking. And it's on Netflix, not HBO. The Keepers is on Netflix,
thank
not
you.
HBO.
Thank you. The show The Keepers is on Netflix. I don't know why I keep thinking
I'm hanging
HBO.
up the phone, getting
Bye.
ready for my big assignment today. I'll talk to you. Bye.
Bye. So anyway, what do you? I mean, what do you think?
No, I understand that, but there's, you know, as somebody who has spent over the last decade a lot of time in Hartford, listened to things being debated, whether or not there are things that I kind of had any dog in the fight, so to speak. You know, there's sometimes that I'll, if I'm in or through Hartford, I'll stop and I'll just go just for the knowledge of learning and listening to, you know, the dialogue. I watch a lot of CTN in terms of trying to, you know, catch up on other things that are going on, but I often wished that some of the representatives and senators who will say one thing in private and very passionate, you know, how strongly they feel about something, I think to myself, boy, if they would take 10% of that stuff on the floor, how better off their constituents would be throughout the state for their willingness to step up. But oftentimes, I think that there's pressure from either within the rules of the General Assembly itself, perhaps, or as evidenced by this and I wish I could remember his name, but I don't.
We'll have it. We'll have it tomorrow.
Yeah, getting in trouble, kind of getting his called to the principal's office.
Because who was that other legislator that spoke out so passionately about the appointment of the judge?
He did an outstanding. I emailed him, and I don't remember his name.
I know, we have to find that out.
But he was in. I think he was in West Haven or somewhere down there, and I sent him an email and said, "Bravo! I mean, more people should," and he responded as well. But so that's a tough issue. But I go back to the thing that I was talking about earlier, where I think I'd be interested to see over the next several days and so forth, if folks who are watching the show, I'd be interested to hear from others on this whole issue of why is it so beyond the realm of possibility for a judicial branch or a judicial review council to consider that there are judges who are retaliating from the bench. It's almost as if, well, that's not even possible. It is possible. It is happening. There is clear evidence of this stuff. And
well, I often these kind of issues, the focus is on addressing the complainant and why are they complaining, what are their motivations, and then you diminish their opinion by focusing on that. In other words, oh, you lost the case? Well, no wonder you're saying these things about the judge. Oh, you got arrested and had drugs? No wonder you're saying you were beat up. Oh, you come from a home that's dysfunctional and your parents are always out drinking or whatever. No wonder you say the priest is abusing you. They always focus on the complainant to try to diminish their credibility. And I think that's what often happens in the courts too. Oh, you lost? No wonder you don't like what's going on.
Right, and then you have situations where other folks will kind of band together, and another judge will help support if somebody's got an appeal pending or something, and they'll stand up and essentially just kind of support the decision, and then it's like, well, you've got a problem with everybody. Every judge you've been in front of, you filed a grievance against. Well, if they're all doing something wrong or they're all trying to support the original wrong act, then yes, where do you don't just say, oh, all right, well, never mind, But
well, Dan,
maybe we'll do a longer show about this.
I know we could go on a long time with this, but I know Ed tries to fit the half-hour segments into 2 hours to give to cable to replay during the week.
I better go.
So we're going to have to cut another show short. We're going to have to cut Chris Janko short tomorrow. So we're signing out. Tune in tomorrow. Chris Janko will be here. Thanks for joining us. Bye.